Hello again, class. We're back to water heaters, and I told you we're going to start with Energy Guide. A few things I thought about between these videos. One of them that I overlooked. If you're doing electric water heater, I would use cement blocks. Now, some of you who have done water heaters have probably seen them. And what the cement blocks do is to get the tank up off the floor. Electric water heaters don't have legs as the gas heaters do, and even to put a hose on to drain it would be difficult. So what I would recommend is you get four by 8 by 16 solid cement blocks. The hollow blocks are really for building walls, and they're not designed to be laying flat. They stand on end. So get yourself some blocks and put the heater in it on top of them. It looks good, and it makes life a lot easier for whoever has to drain it in the future. Also, remember the electric water heater, unlike the gas, is a lot more flexible in that you can install it in places where you couldn't with the gas, because the gas you need to have the gas piping and you need to have the smoke pipe. Okay, so let's move on to the energy guide. This is that yellow and black tag that you see on all appliance or most appliances, especially on water heaters. If you go shopping for a dishwasher, stove, refrigerator, and other appliances, you'll find this tag. Now, the one that's on a water heater it says Energy Guide. I'm looking at it right here. It says Energy Guide on the top of the tag. And also in the middle of the tag is a number. And this one here has 195. And that is the cost for this heater for 1 year at the estimated energy cost in this area. Now, to the left of that is the model that when they were tested, kind of like car mileage, and they would test them like with equal sized water heaters. The one with the lowest that was tested is, my glasses are right here, 180, looks like 189. So in other words, this heater is within $6 a year of being the least expensive to operate. So it's a pretty good heater. Now the most expensive is 200 and it looks like 95. So the cheapest heater is only $6 less. The most expensive is $100 more. So this heater is in the top 5 or 10% of the class, close more like 5%. This is a very good heater. Now let me give you a little background, and I don't recommend that you do this. So you wonder how far back do these energy guides go? Well, let's go back to, I believe it was 1978. And I was already in business, and I was installing a heater in a mansion in Newport. Not one of the ones on the tourist list, but a big, it was on Bellevue Avenue in Setback. It was actually a place you could actually live in, but it was a mansion. And the heater gave out. And it was a 50-gallon gas, 75-gallon gas. It was a big heater. I had never put in a 75-gallon gas before. So I brought it there, and I forgot my hand truck, and I had to slide it down the stairs. And the ceiling must have been 12-foot ceiling in the basement. I never saw one like that, which meant a lot of stairs to get it in. So I walked it over to where it was going and stripped the box and disconnected the other one. And just before I put it in, I spotted this yellow and black tag. Never seen one before, never heard of it. Nobody had ever, told us it was coming. And I read the tag, and the heater that I had, it said, we'll say it was this heater, 195, and it said the model with the highest energy cost, 195. So I had the most expensive one that was tested in the group. So what do you do? If any homeowner had seen that tag, they probably wouldn't have accepted the heater because it's too expensive to operate. So keep that in mind. And what I did is I just, got rid of the tag, obviously. But after that, again, you learn a lesson because they were just coming into, they were just coming out. Some heaters had them, some didn't. I guess on this particular model, They had just come out. They maybe had used up the last of the ones without the tag, and I had like the first batch with the tag. So mine became one of the last ones without a tag. But in the future, I always check to make sure that the heater I was putting in was at least in the middle of the class, if not better. And that's my advice to you. Once in a while, you get a customer who actually looks at this tag. Okay, let's go on to gas water heaters. Now, on page 259, I don't know if you have downloaded these, but in the textbook, we have a sketch of a gas water heater. Now, this sketch has everything, with the exception of the elements that heat the water, of course, are not there, but pretty much everything else that we talked about. It's got the hot water in, it's got the anode rod, it's got the dip tube, it's got the temperature pressure relief valve, which could be in the top or in the side. That's the only difference. If it has a side-mounted TMP tap, then you need the short element. You need the 4-inch, because if the 8-inch, one time I tried it just for kicks, and it went in, but maybe an inch or two before the threads would catch, it was bumping the flue inside. Okay, so let's start with that. The bottom of the water heater, you have a burner. It's just a different version of the one you see on your gas stove, and it's in a chamber that is kind of rounded at the top. And at the top of this chamber, where the burner is what they call the flue, FLUE. Now, the flue is the equivalent of a chimney. It carries the exhaust gases up and out of the combustion chamber, out the top of the heater, which we'll talk about later. So the flue is the same material, apparently, or maybe a little thicker metal as the tank itself, coated with obviously the same thing. And as the water goes up, as it actually heats, not the water, excuse me, as the fumes go up, combustion gases, they heat the water off to the side as it goes up. So you get a little free heat from the exhaust gases. So somebody must have figured, well, let's see, the exhaust gases are going out faster than they need to, because it's a lot of heat and a small chimney, so it just flies out of there. So what they did is they dropped in a strip of metal, and it looks like a flat, thin piece of metal that somebody kept twisting and twisting, so it's all twisted. But the hot air can go around it, spiral around it. It slows it down. By slowing down the exhaust gases, the heat, a lot more heat goes out into the water on either side. Very clever idea, very inexpensive way to do it. Now, before you put a water heater in, some of you guys might have already noticed this. The water heater gets tilted a little more than, uh, so that the top of the heater is down a bit. It might even slide out. But if you reach into the flue at the top, you can actually lift this thing out. It has these two little, like, doggies, I think they call them, that hold it in. It just drops into place. That's it. That's all it holds it in. And it's designed to last, again, as long as the heater, and does a good job. Now, would the heater work without the flue baffle? If somebody lost or it wasn't there? Yes, of course it would work, but it would cost more money to heat the gas. Now, so we're just coming out of the top of the heater with the exhaust gases. At the very top of the heater, there is a draft hood. It's that little hat that goes on at the very top. It's usually in the box. It always is in the box with the heater, not on the heater. It's in the box with the heater. And you set it in place. It's got little holes in the top of the sheet metal on the top, and you just put it in those holes. And you should use sheet metal screws to fasten that down. And once it's mounted on top, you notice that it's up in the air, maybe an inch, a little more. And that's to allow a little bit of ventilation there for the exhaust gases. They'll still go up and out, but they want a little bit of space there. If you get a downdraft, so it doesn't blow the pilot out, it will like come out those holes, like that, things like that. So that's your draft hood. They're not interchangeable. Different manufacturers would have different draft hoods. So that's That's part of the water heater when you buy it. All right, once you put that on, you put the smoke pipe on. Smoke pipe is one of two sizes. Now it seems most of them are 3 inch. One time they were 3 and 4 inch. Excuse me, whatever size they are, you fasten them to the top of the heater with sheet metal screws. And now a lot of people probably aren't aware of this, at least tier one guys. I don't know if you guys are, but smoke pipe is supposed to be pitched at the same rate as your drain pipes, 1/4 inch to the foot. So make a note of that. Okay, make a note of that. Now, normally the smoke pipe goes directly into the chimney. I'd say what, 18 inches from the elbow, and you're into the chimney. In 18 inches, nobody's going to lose any sleep if you're not pitching up that what 3/8 of an inch. If you're flat or a little bit up, nobody's going to get too concerned. But if you have a long run to get to a chimney of some sort, say 5 feet, which is unusual, I know, but it could happen, and you don't pitch it, or worse, you pitch it down a little bit, you're going to hear about it. Okay, so make a note: 1/4 inch pitch on the smoke pipe, and it has to be fastened with sheet metal screws. So if somebody's hit it by mistake with something, it's not going to fall off. Years ago, many years ago, it wasn't that way. And I remember one house I went in. It was about, well, not that long ago. Oh, for me, not that long ago, maybe 25 years ago. And the water heater was in like a sunroom of the house, and the draft hood and the smoke pipe were gone. It was just venting into the house. I couldn't believe it. It's the only one I ever saw like that. Now, this is called a vented appliance. An example of another vented appliance would be a boiler. You got smoke pipe that's vented. An example of an unvented appliance would be your stove, the gas stove. Now, a gas stove vents into the room. The only thing that keeps it out of from being a problem is that the size of the BTU output is not that bad, right? It's not like the water heater. The water heater is probably 60, 70,000. Stove is maybe 20,000. So it's not too bad. But when you see a water heater with no smoke pipe, it definitely gets your attention. Okay, now on a gas water heater, I mentioned about putting some blocks underneath. Gas, you can, but they usually have legs. At least the ones I've seen in this area all have legs, so they're already up a bit, and the drain, because of the burner being underneath everything, the drain itself is up pretty high in a gas water heater. All right, so you're up plenty high enough to drain the heater. You don't need to put blocks like the electric to allow you to put a hose on there. All right, so the only time I think I would put blocks up on a gas water heater is if I was working in a basement that had signs of flooding, like some old houses with dirt cellars, or even maybe they actually used to call a rat slab. It's like a very thin layer of cement and a stone foundation and evidence of it having flooded. Then I would put blocks under the gas water heater. I'd put it under anything: gas, electric, a boiler. All right, you don't want your appliance to flood out. In fact, under the electric, I think I would use 8 inch blocks, right? Keep it up, keep it up high. Now, let's talk about the size of the gas water heaters. I mentioned it briefly in the electric water heater installation. Gas is 30, 40 gallons. Now, sometimes, and you don't want to do it like you're being nosy, or nosy, I guess is probably the best word. You might want to find out who is going to be living in this house. If you've got an owner with some teenagers, I guess boys too, but girls in particular. You got two or three, girls in this roughly the same age bracket, like early 10, 12, up to maybe 16, 18. They use a lot of hot water. I've seen this happen. And you put in a small, you go try to get by with a 30 gallon, you could have a problem. I would recommend a 40. And if they want like a 30, they're talking about something small, you could tell them the reason you might want to go with the 40. And the difference to operate it is not that great. Okay, so, and the cost isn't that much. It's more, but not that much. The installation part is the same. It doesn't take us any longer. So If it's going to be heavy use, that's it, and one example would be a number of kids using it. Go with the recommend a larger heater, and that way you've covered yourself. Should it not do the job? I've seen it happen. Let's see on the gas water heater. Let's see the size. Like I said, the biggest I've seen is 75 gallon, and that was just at one time at a mansion. Usually it was 30, 40, 50 on gas. 50 would be usually more than adequate in most houses. But if somebody wants it, put it in. Now, going back to the electric for just a minute, I remember I put in a 120-gallon electric many years ago, and the owner was a nice guy. I knew him. I knew him pretty well. He was actually the father-in-law of a contractor. Some brothers I used to work for that were contractors, and he's the father-in-law of one of the boys. And he wanted a 120, a rental 120, and his it was a two-family in Florida. And I told him, I said, it's going to be expensive to operate. I'd never put one in. I'd never even seen one. They're not very common. He says, no, they assured him it would be okay. I said, all right. So I put the 120 in. It was a monster. If you put in the 80, they're pretty big. Well, 120 must have been 6 feet high, and it was like, oh, at least over 2 feet wide. Hooked it all up. It was easy enough to put in, all the same connections. Within a few months, I got a phone call. Take it out. We're changing it. It was so many years ago, I forgot what we put in. Probably gas. I don't know. It was a long time ago. And I guess he had the electric company take it out. He got his bill, and it was staggering. Okay, now if you want to know, if you're curious, next time you're around electric water heater, remember what I told you. An 80 electric is kind of like a 30, 40 gallon gas. Notice the cost to operate for a year. I remember this figure. Now, this goes way back where I actually checked this out. Natural gas was about 125 a year. Propane was maybe 175. So it was more money, but not outrageously more, but more, definitely more. And electric was like off the chart. It was like 300 um, for heated to do the same job, like an 80. So electric is nice and quiet, but it comes with a very high price. Just like electric heat, you can have it installed for very, very cheap. Um, but it costs a fortune to run. That has never changed. Okay, um, I'm going to cover. Oh, one thing we forgot the controls. I almost overlooked the controls. On a gas water heater, now they have sealed combustion chambers, and the thermostat, the setting on it, I would have to actually go down and look at the one in my house. I'm a little rusty on it. I haven't done a lot of the sealed combustion chambers, but the setting on most heaters would have off and on, and then would have pilot. Let's see, pilot, and then there's also a setting that would be vacation. Okay, vacation would have more than pilot. It would actually heat the water, but it wouldn't heat it hot enough. It might be say 80 degrees, and so you wouldn't be wasting heat. And then it would have the actual dial, so you'd set it for the temperature you wanted. Now, a note I'd like you to make, and I know we talked about it, but it's one that you definitely have to know. It's always asked for plumbing license, is the temperature maximum that you can set a water heater for. Most of them, I believe, won't go over 130, which is the legal maximum. Okay, it's a good idea to carry a thermometer in your truck so you can check these out once in a while. Once you set it, you don't want one that's defective. It doesn't happen much, but if it did, you're responsible. So make sure the setting is not over 130. If the homeowner wants to do something and can change the temperature, like a tankless off a boiler, that's their business. But you don't leave. When you leave, it's set at 130. And the vacation setting, you could tell the owner that's if they go away for say a couple of weeks or whatever, they can just leave it on vacation and it'll keep the water temperature way down. I don't know. I'm saying 80. I know it's not high enough that would be acceptable. Then pilot, of course, is just that. The pilot light is on if it has a pilot. Okay. Uh, and that way you don't have to like relight it when you come home. Okay, that is about it on water heaters. And we're not going to be doing boilers. We're going to talk briefly about the instantaneous water heaters, also called tankless water heaters. All right, now these heaters have been around. I can see it here in the book. It mentions in Europe and Japan for many years. I know they were in Germany, oh, more than 50 years ago. I was stationed over there in the army. It was like a little over 50 years ago, and they had these. Although I didn't have one in the house I was at. And I remember here in 1979, I installed three of these uh, instantaneous water heaters for a heating system in Providence. It wasn't my idea. I would not have touched it because it was brand new. But the owner of the property had done his homework and he knew all about them and he liked what he heard. And it looked very much like the domestic water version, the drinking water version, except that you hooked a circulator on it. And the way all of these instantaneous water heaters work is this: they're very simple. They have no holding tank or a very small tank. It doesn't really amount to anything. And as soon as the water is turned on, the pressure drop trips the flame, and it's usually quite the flame or an electric element. And because there's no tank to take up any, to help out, it has to be a very powerful flame or element. And when the water is shut off, in the case of a domestic water, you turn the water on, the hot water on, and the pressure drops. That's what turns the flame on. When you shut it off, that shuts the flame off. So they haven't changed. That's been, like I said, and they also go way back before my time. And the idea is great. And I installed a domestic water one in Westport Harbor for a guy that I knew. He was an acquaintance. I won't say he was a good friend, but a guy I knew. And maybe at about the same time I did the heating ones in Providence. This was around 1979, 1980. And he had it for maybe 20 years, 15, 20 years. And he called me once and asked if I wanted it back for a classroom prop because he said it was okay, but it wasn't quite enough hot water. I don't know if his kids grew up or what. I don't remember the details now. And I said, sure. And he gave it to me. And it was German made. The name escapes me now. It's a really nice piece of equipment. And I'm sure it would have lasted much longer. Now, this was a unit that was at least 15 years old, maybe 20. And I used it in class as a sample. It had a coil wrapped around, and it was a lot of BTUs, when it came on. But because it didn't heat the water when you weren't using it, it was a pretty efficient unit. Now, one thing you should know is that they call that a, a regular water heater, like we've been talking about. A standard water heater has standby heat loss. So make a note of that. Standby heat loss. Okay? And standby heat loss means that you have heat loss. And here in the book, excuse me, they call it storage loss. This book is from, I believe, Chicago. But we call it standby heat loss. So what happens is while it's standing by, waiting for you to use it, it's cooling off. Now, you guys that have worked on boilers, these are a better example. Boilers cool off very fast. If you worked on a boiler, you know what I'm talking about. Let's say you're changing a boiler out for whatever reason. You just shut the power off when you get there and you get everything all set up. And let's say you don't get to start working on it for several hours. During that time, it'll go from 180, 190 down to maybe 150, 140, or even less. It loses all kinds of heat. It doesn't hold the heat very well at all. That's a boiler now. Now, water heaters are better. They're not great, but they're better than that. And the water heaters are rated by how much they lose per hour. And what happens is when they get down to a certain temperature, the flame comes on or the electric comes on and brings them back up to what the range is for the water heater. So it's going to be a close range. It'll go up to, we'll say, 130. It'll fall to maybe 115, 120. It'll come back on. and so on, even when you're not using it. Now, there are a couple of storage tanks that we use with boilers. So if you have a tankless water heater in a boiler, for example, this is a coil of tubing. These are not new. These go way back. I remember when I was a very young kid, my father had one. It was a tank, a little mini tank outside the boiler, and it was surrounded with hot water from the boiler. And then somebody figured out, let's take that coil and put it in the boiler. So the tanklesses that you see now are always built into the boiler. This is the tankless on a boiler now, not these instantaneous water heaters. This would be a tankless coil. But the storage tank that water goes to, because the coil is getting the heat from the boiler, which is dangerously contaminated water, it gets all that heat, 180, 200 degree water, and then there's this little circulator that runs it over to our storage tank. Now, one of those tanks, and it's still around, it came out around 1980, because I remember the first batch which I put in were defective, and they paid us $50 to swap it out, which in those days was quite a bit of money. They only lasted a short time, I think a year. There was some problem. The bugs weren't worked out, and I changed it over. And this next tank lasted, I guess it's still there. And they are very, very efficient. They only lose 1 degree an hour. Okay, so make a note: 1 degree an hour standby heat loss. That's a Boilermate. That's the blue tank, right? Now another one is called a Superstore. Again, you might be familiar with this one. This one is even better and more expensive to buy. It loses 1/2 a degree an hour. So if you had a Superstore that was at 130 degrees and you went to work at, say, 8 o'clock, you left the house and you came home at 5 o'clock, that's what, 9 hours later, it would only lose 4.5 degrees. So it would go down to 125.5 degrees from 130. That's phenomenal, right? It's extremely efficient. The Boilermate's not bad either. It would only have lost, what, 9 or 10 degrees. So to give you an idea how efficient some tanks can be. Regular water heaters, I don't think they're quite that efficient. Boilers, I think we all are aware of that. You shut a boiler off when you go to work in the morning at 180 and you come home, I am sure the water won't even be warm enough to burn you, right? It'll be well under 130. So I guess it all depends on how they want to insulate it. Okay, like I said, the instantaneous water heaters, I don't know quite how popular they are. I guess they're getting better from what I hear. They're better than the ones that I put in, which were pretty good. The biggest drawback was that they didn't provide enough hot water on the ones that provided hot and cold water. It was and the heating ones, I don't know. They just kind of disappeared. I don't know if if anybody, when we go live, if any of you have any stories about ones that you put in or ones that you've seen or worked on, we'll talk about it. And also the instantaneous domestic water, the hot and cold, if anybody's installed those, talk about those too. Okay, that is it on electric, gas, and a little bit on instantaneous water heaters, and also the tankless, tied in with the storage tanks being the Boilermate or the Superstore. And again, I'm sure there's others out there, and we could talk about them in class. Also, I just remembered on the T&P valve, that rod that goes down into the water, it's usually like a blue Teflon, which it is, I believe. It's blue Teflon. If you ever saw one that was like really old, I don't think there's any out there, they didn't coat the rod at one time, and it used to pick up some corrosion. I used to start to corrode, and my guess is it wasn't performing like it should have. And somewhere along the way, I'm guessing in the 1970s, they started dipping it in Teflon, which is great because when you take one of these T&P valves out and throw it in your brass and copper pile, you'll notice that the Teflon's still there, right? It's dirty, but it's still on there. Okay, that's it. I will see you live in class.